Wait a second for the recording to start. There we go. So what we do with the rest of the year is really up to us. Do you have anything specific that you want to learn about for the next 2 weeks or so?
Mm, no, not really.
Really? Okay. Um, so I'll be doing some like life math skills stuff that you guys probably already know, but just in case.
Okay.
Also some programming stuff. We'll be working a little bit with Excel. Um,
Oh
just,
yeah, Excel would be nice.
so just some basic stuff that might help in real life. That's not necessarily calculus related, but I have to make sure it's tangentially math related at least.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to start with this. We're going to have a mini lesson on retirement planning actually, um,
Okay.
which deals with logarithms, exponents, and compound interest. So you guys have seen this at least once before in pre-calculus. This will all be a review, but so logarithm is really just rewriting an exponent. So if you have a to the c equals b in exponential form, we could write that as log base a of b equals c in logarithmic form.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for instance, if I had 4 raised to some power equals 1028, we could rewrite that in logarithmic form. So this is log base a, log base 4 of b 1028 equals cx to get 5. Okay, so what I personally use logarithms for is for my own retirement planning. So before I really get into it, I just want to show what's happening with our interest as I keep going through this. So if I put $100 into a mutual fund and gain 10% interest per year, then after 3 years, so that first year we end up earning 10% of our $100 and we end up with $110 in the account, right? For that
Yes.
second year, we have $110 in the account for the start of the second year. 10% of 110 is $11, and you actually end up with more than just the $10 that you originally had, right? So this keeps going.
Yeah.
Then each year, that 10% is going to be worth more and more. And you'll keep adding more and more to your account, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now I'm adding 12.1 for my interest instead. So if I wanted to write a formula for this, um, then I could say what's actually happening is we started with a principal, write in a different color.
Okay. Yeah.
I started with a principal, so that's a starting amount. And I multiplied by 1, so that would be 100% of my principal. But then we added 10% of what we had.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I raised that, I kept multiplying that by
Mm-hmm.
itself for however many years that we increase this by. Um,
And how do we do it when it's quarterly
so
and
when
we
it's,
want to figure out
if you're
the year?
compounding more than one time per year, then we'll split that annual interest into a fraction of that annual interest, but also multiply by another number of times. So if
Okay.
this was quarterly, then you would receive 1/4 of your 10% interest 4 times per year, right? So instead of
Yeah.
compounding 3 times in 3 years, you would actually compound 12 times in 3 years. So that's 3 years compounding 4 times per year. But every time that you compound, instead of compounding at 10%, you would compound at 1/4 of 10% for your principal.
Okay.
So if you want a general form for this, um, then we could put your rate here, and that would
Yeah.
end up giving your account balance. Okay, if I rewrote that as a logarithm, um, so if I wanted to know how many years it would take this account to reach $1,000, right now I have 100 times 1.1 raised to the t power equals 1,000. I can divide both sides by 100 to get 10 equals 1.1 raised to the t power.
Okay.
Then log base a 1.1 of b 10 equals t. Gives me 24.15 years. Okay, so getting a little bit more real life, slightly more. Trying to keep my numbers um, easy to work with. If we compounded our interest quarterly, like you were saying, we would start with $100. But then after the first quarter of the year, we would gain 2.5% instead of 10%.
Yes.
Okay, so at the end of the first year, we would end up with more than just $110 that we had when we were compounding annually.
Okay.
Okay, so the more times that you compound, the larger your number becomes. However, there is an upper limit on how much we can compound here. And if we wanted to find it, we could take the limit. The limit as our number of times that we compound our interest approaches infinity
Okay.
of p times p times 1 plus r over n to the nt. Means I'm compounding infinitely many times, which
And
if we
how is it useful?
for finance, it's not. However, for things occurring in the natural world that compound, this happens a lot actually. So things like population. If you had a population of a bacteria in a petri dish, that compounds continuously. So it's always splitting.
Okay.
Um, so generally, things that happen in the natural world are continuously compounding. Um, really, it's only finance that doesn't do that. Because no bank is going to allow you to compound infinitely many times.
Okay. Yeah.
However, when you are opening a bank account for the first time, you can usually ask for a quarterly compound interest rate, and they'll probably give it to you because you can always walk out and go to another bank. If you don't
Okay.
ask, they'll give you annual interest, and you'll only be compounding once per year.
But isn't that if I say quarterly, I get less or the same amount when I get yearly?
No.
I mean, they make sure that the interest rate is lower. Like for example, let's say yearly it's 10%, but then when I ask for quarterly, they say like 8%.
So you can ask to keep 10% but compound quarterly. They'll usually give that to you, again because you can take your business elsewhere. There's not many people that ask for it. So because the number of people that ask for it is so low, the bank's usually willing to do it. At least in my
Okay.
experience in the U.S. So every time I've asked for it, they've given it to me.
Okay.
All right. I need to erase all the stuff that I just wrote over the wrong slide. Okay. So for me personally, um, we'll say I'm about 30 years old. I've saved around 46,000 for my first couple years of teaching. I've got these mutual funds that I invest in. So one of these mutual funds is showing here. So I did pull this earlier in the year when the stock market was doing a little bit better, but you can see life to date since 1971. I was averaging about 13.5% interest per year on this particular mutual fund. So if you had invested from the very beginning, that's what I would have averaged. Since I started investing around 5 years ago for this particular mutual fund, I'm looking closer to 14% interest for what I've actually gotten out of this. Although, since this is more of a like past 50 years projection, um, I'm gonna underestimate this 13% and assume that the U.S. is not gonna do as well for the next 50 years as it did in the past 50 years. I'm looking to hopefully average about 8% interest over my retirement account.
With the stock market crash now, did you uh put your money out or?
No. So because I'm investing long term, the stock market crash actually kind of works in my favor. Once this rebounds again, this is just a really cheap time for me to buy more stock.
Okay.
If you're always investing super long term and you just don't worry about whether the market's up or down and keep putting money in the end it doesn't really affect you as much. Again, if you look at most mutual funds in the United States, if you're going to look at the top 500 companies in the U.S., then over a long extended period of time, so like this in the past 50 years, you actually come out making out quite a bit.
Okay.
If you're a short-term investor, so you're just investing in one particular stock, or you're investing for a really short amount of time, then this was a big hit for you. And since I'm not actually planning on touching this money until I'm 65, so it's like 35 years from now, um, the stock market being down today really doesn't matter that much to me. It just means I can buy stuff cheaper.
Okay.
Um, it's unlikely that the top 500 companies like General Electric or Microsoft are going to go completely out of business just because things are down right now. So having more people sell right now is actually good. Anyways, so investing super long term, and I'm gonna say I can retire as long as I've got $1 million in the bank. Um, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna invest all this money into different mutual funds and sector funds that don't overlap. So with the hope of spreading out my investments as much as possible. So I'm looking at mutual funds that have a lifetime return of over 10% right now in different sectors. So that might be I'm going to invest in every company in the top 500 companies on on the New York Stock Exchange that is involved in creating medical equipment. So it'd be companies like General Electric. I'm also going to take a separate mutual fund and invest in a bunch of maybe computer-related companies, so people that make CPU and graphic card chips and that kind of thing. Then invest in a bunch of tech companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft and that kind of thing. So I'm investing in a bunch of different large sector funds, not just one company,
Okay.
and trying to spread out that risk as much as possible. I'm also investing as a mutual fund, so I'm pooling my money together with a bunch of other people. So in this case, a couple 100,000 other people, to make investments in hundreds of millions of dollars, um, so that the impact of me taking out that money or any one person taking out that money isn't as big. Um, okay, so assuming that I average about 8%, I can set this up. So I'm compounding, I actually compound more than quarterly in the stock market because this is compounding um, every couple days. It's compounding every day the stock market is open. But I'm going to model this as compounding quarterly. Then I would reach $1 million in this many years. So my principal was 46,000. I'm just going to leave it there and not put any more money into my retirement account from now until I'm 65, which is not my actual strategy. But let's just say I have this money in there. I forget about it. Um, so I don't know. I'm arrested,
Okay.
go to prison for 35 years, and come out of prison and see how much I have left. um, so I've got one plus my interest rate of 8%. Which I'm compounding quarterly, so that's 4 times per year, um, for some number of years. So that's 4 times t, and I want to reach $1 million. So I can divide 1 million by 46,000, gives me 100 over 46 on my left side, and then set that up as a logarithm. So log base a of b equals c. So that's log 1.02 of 100 over 46 equals 4t. Divide both sides by 4 and I'll have my t. So in 38.87 years, if I do absolutely nothing else towards retirement, I'm expecting my retirement account to be worth at least $1 million.
Okay. Well, that's a lot.
Okay, any questions on what we did?
I don't know. No?
Okay. We could, if we wanted, start using some calculus with this as well. So if I derived this equation in terms of time, what would it represent?
The change in uh,
Okay, I've got our
rate.
formula up here with all of the explanations of the variables too, if that helps you.
How the change in rate of your money changing?
Change in rate would be a second derivative. Um, but this would be the change in the account balance, that's A, over time, versus how much the account changed per year, or how much money you
Okay.
gained in that particular year. So if you took the derivative and plugged in A prime at 3, that would tell you how much money you would expect to make in year 3. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Um, if I derive that again, then that would be the change in the rate of change, which I think is what you said earlier. So that would be A prime
Yeah.
prime. That would tell you the acceleration, if you want to think of it that way, of your money, which isn't directly useful for this retirement planning, but it can be useful if you were gonna if you're gonna buy and sell stocks quickly in a short term. Um, so because of what we learned from concavity this year,
Yeah.
um, as long as your general trend is concave up, as your money is increasing, then that you should have some time once you realize that your general trend becomes concave down before you actually hit the maximum point that a stock is worth. So what we'll do, or what I would do if I was going to buy and sell stocks on a really short-term basis. Um, so let's say I'm looking at 1 week's worth of stock prices, and I want to see whether I want to try to sell my stock when it's at its highest point, and buy stock when it's at its lowest point. What I would do is create a series of dots. So this is stock price per minute. That we can end up creating a best fitting line that would give us a curve. And then when that curve becomes concave down, that means the stock price is still rising at this point, is still going up. But the general trend says that it will eventually come down, right? So we're approaching our maximum point. Then that's the point where I would try to sell. So I actually try to sell here. By the time it goes through and the person actually sells it, I'm selling at about the maximum point, hopefully. Or I'm selling somewhere within this range where I'm still getting a higher price than what I bought the stock for. The point here, where our stock price is decreasing but is concave up, so anything along this range where I'm creating my curve, might be a good place to buy a stock. So then I'm buying a stock at a low price and then expecting that if I stay concave up, um, I'll end up getting a higher price that I can sell it for. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, it's not perfect for stock market. The stock market is really volatile, um, but this is how general trends are used in retail. So, for instance, Walmart, when they're trying to figure out when to stop stocking their shelves of something that's a fashion. So, let's say um, Pokemon trading cards were kind of a big popular fashion in the late 90s. But they were really popular for like 1998, and then kind of lost popularity really quickly in 1999. What Walmart did,
Um,
in order to figure out how many Pokemon cards they should buy for their store,
okay.
is they looked at the general trend for this would be Pokemon card sales, and then once their sales hit a point where they stopped being concave up and started being concave down, they stopped buying new Pokemon cards here.
Okay.
Now they still have Pokemon cards on their shelves, but because the sales are still increasing, they can sell off all of those cards that they have on their shelves. Hopefully by this point, when the trend is kind of reaching an end.
Yeah.
and then have all of their shelf space clear for whatever the next fashion trend is. Because most of Walmart's competitors at the time were only looking at whether sales were increasing or decreasing, which means most stores were stopping buying at this point here
Yeah.
when the sales hit um, when the rate of change of sales hit zero. The slope of the sales hit zero means that the sales stopped increasing and started decreasing. That's when most retail sales at the time were stopping to buy. They would usually still end up with extra inventory. So that's Pokemon cards that they had bought that people do not want to buy anymore. They would have to either.
But how do they figure out how many Pokemon sales there were?
So all they do is they track the number of sales per day over time.
But
Um,
where do they get this information?
so they can get it from their own store if they want. Um, so let's say we've bought 100 Pokemon cards, and we're going to see how many of those cards that we sell each day.
Okay.
So that could be as simple as in your store making sure there's a barcode on everything. So you scan all the inventory that you buy, and then whenever it goes through the cash register, you scan that again. That becomes information that goes to your manager. How much of each product did we sell per day?
And this is public information, or
No. However, if you're the manager at your company, you know all of this information for your store. And then for all Walmarts, you would know this. For all Walmarts, Walmart's management would have this information available to all of your individual managements at that store. So you have information for all of Walmart's store. There is business in trying to get this information from your competitors, which would be people who actually go into different stores and track how many of particular items are on a shelf.
okay.
Um, but the information for other stores is usually not publicly available. It's just within your own chain. You have all of this information already.
Okay.
So we'll buy a set of 100, and then we can start tracking to see how much of those that we've actually sold per day. I want to stop buying. I want to stop restocking that inventory at the point where our sales per day change from concave up to concave down. And that hopefully gives us enough time where we can sell off the rest of the Pokemon cards before people stop buying it completely. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Um, that strategy, just looking at the second derivative instead of the first derivative, allowed Walmart to drive out most of their competition in almost all of rural the United States. So in my city, there was a time for about 10 years from um, around 2000 to 2010 where the only retail store in my area was Walmart. And that was because they were so good at this that none of the other stores could compete. And they had information on all of the Walmarts in the country, so they had enough information on other retail stores within their own brand
Okay.
that they were able to predict this a lot better than a person who was trying to run a small business in my town.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, there's big money in financial planning. If you wanted to go into retail financial planning management, um, I was working at a movie theater for my first job, and we had a person on staff that was doing this while we were opening. They were the only person in the building that was making six figures, I think. So he was making 120,000 a year, trying to plan out all of the inventory that we would stock our movie theater for by looking at sales projections. So the sales for what was happening in our store and um, when people were stopping to buy new movie theater tickets to figure out when to buy the rights to the next movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he did that. He also tried to come up with ways to make our management behind the counter more efficient. So we had um, originally we had a counter that looked like this with
Yeah.
three or four different people that were behind a cashier, and you could go and buy food. And we had like a popcorn machine and a soda machine and a hot dog machine, maybe. and a couple
Yeah.
people behind us that would try to run food back and forth to people, right? So
And
that we
you
could
work
fulfill
there?
orders. What they ended up doing was they scrapped that and gave each individual person popcorn, Coke machine, hot dog machine behind the counter,
Okay.
and then also installed um, a heated bin so that we could take popcorn out of the popcorn machine and put it in the bin so that it was ready for whenever um, and would stay hot for whenever a customer actually ordered it. So we could pop popcorn um, in the middle of a movie, which was kind of a downtime for us. And we had less people that were trying to get into a movie before it opened and buy popcorn.
Okay.
I don't know, it was little
Oh,
things like that, just trying to make the business more efficient. Um,
that's smart.
that allowed him to
That's
make
smart.
more money than the people who were on staff. I also had a person though that was with me at the time, who was actually in my pre-calculus class at the time, who noticed that the boxes of our bag in a box for our Coke and our popcorn that we were buying had a lot of unused space in it. So we'd have these massive boxes, rectangular boxes for these cylindrical popcorn bins that were relatively small inside. And he figured out that if we changed the shape of the boxes to be closer to the shape of the popcorn that we were actually selling, um, that our company would end up saving about $10,000 a year. And it turned out we were only one retail branch for the company had several hundred of these movie theaters throughout the United States. So it ended up saving a larger company. It's like 1.2 million a year. So he was started at an hourly salary of somewhere around $8.50 an hour. By the end of the second week, he was in management because he had presented a couple of his calculus-based ideas, which is
Oh,
really
okay.
optimization of cardboard,
That's really
and was
smart.
able to put a number on it to show how much money it would save the company, and then take that to management. So by the end of it, he was making about triple that after his first week of working with us. So if you're good at calculus and you're able to solve problems like this,
Yeah.
you can save your company a lot of money. Um, but in order to actually get money for that, you need to be able to put a value on it, and that's where calculus comes in.
Okay.
All right, that's more than enough for today since we're just kind of goofing around.
Okay.
I'm gonna
No, it was really
I'm gonna
to
throw
me.
a couple sample problems on compound interest for us, just so I've got something to grade for this week. Um, but I'm gonna try to keep the homework to relatively minimal, so that you guys can focus on other AP exams or finals or senior projects over the last couple weeks.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for coming. Tomorrow will be a little bit different, or next class will be a little bit different. We'll be looking at some programming stuff instead.
Oh, okay. Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.